Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
I had a whole bunch of people send me this story from the Los Angeles Times involving lawyers in California. I went to law school in California. I'm not a lawyer in California, however. I never got licensed there. I know quite a few people who did. A couple of good friends of mine still practice law in California. But recently, the California bar suspended 1,600 attorneys, 1,600 attorneys, for violating rules that were set up after the Tom Girardi scandal. The Tom Girardi scandal. I did some videos about that. Tom Girardi was a guy who was a well-known personal injury lawyer. And I mean, there have been documentaries about him on, like, say, American Greed. When you're the subject of an American Greed documentary, you may have made mistakes in your life. But the allegation is that he took money from clients. So when a client case would settle, the money would come into him, and he's supposed to give a chunk of it to the client and then keep a small slice for himself. And apparently the allegation is that he kept more than he should and then strung some of those clients along and never paid them or paid them way late and less than he owed them. So he's also famous because he's married to a quote-unquote real housewife of one of those shows, Real Housewives of Bravo. And he married a woman who is like a century or two younger than him. And he spent a lot of the money, allegedly, on buying her things like singing lessons, which, ironically, she needed but didn't work. But enough of that. Summer Lynn wrote this. More than 1,600 attorneys have been suspended by the California State Bar for violating rules about client trust accounts that were set up after disgraced LA attorney Tom Girardi allegedly stole millions of dollars from his clients. And so a trust account is a bank account that many attorneys have, and they're often required if you handle client money. Now, if you're an attorney and you don't handle client money, you do not necessarily have to have a trust account, because why would you need one? But I, for instance, handle lemon law claims on behalf of clients. So when General Motors, Ford, or Chrysler agree to buy back my client's car, they'll send a check made out to both me and my client, and they'll send it to me. And what I do is I talk to my client and I go, look, I've got this check here. It's made out to both of us. You're going to get this much. I'm going to get this much. Do you agree to that? Okay, fine. I'm going to put the money into my trust account and cut two checks. One to you, one to me. And that's how that works. So attorneys occasionally get in trouble for this. But in California, they've gotten so lax with their oversight that things like the Tom Girardi scandal could take place. So they instituted a thing called the Client Trust Accounts Protection Program, which went into effect last year, and it requires attorneys to register their trust accounts annually with the State Bar, complete a yearly self-assessment of their practices managing client trust accounts, and certify with the State Bar that they comply and understand the requirements for safekeeping funds. After the reporting component is fulfilled, the State Bar then begins compliance reviews and investigative audits when appropriate. So originally, more than 1,700 attorneys were found in violation of the rules and were enrolled as inactive, meaning they were not legally allowed to practice law. As of Thursday, the number dropped to 1,641 because some of the attorneys fulfilled the requirements. So apparently some attorneys just hadn't done the paperwork. Meanwhile, the attorney's special counsel for the State Bar's discipline system emphasized that the suspension is administrative and not disciplinary, meaning that none of these people had stolen money or anything like that. They just simply hadn't complied with the rules of the State Bar. He said that non-compliance with the rules is simply the reporting for now. It may be that people declined to report because they were stealing money from the trust accounts and they didn't want to be found out. So obviously, if you don't comply with these rules, they're going to come looking to see why. And if it's pure laziness, just do it. Save yourself the hassle. Another possibility is that some of the attorneys who were suspended may have already died, but the State Bar does not have a database in order to track that status. And that is a tricky thing. If you're an attorney and you pass away, does somebody automatically call the State Bar and go, hey, just to let you know this guy passed away? And so I can tell you that the State Bar Journal, which is a magazine that gets published and sent out once a month by the Michigan State Bar, actually has a thing called In Memoriam, and they list attorneys who've passed away. And I go through there, and I often spot attorneys have dealt with, oh, it's sad that guy passed away. I've seen it before. They say, so-and-so passed away 18 months ago, and we just found out. So the only way we can find out about that is if the family member comes forward and says this person has passed on. There could be any number of reasons in between for not reporting. So attorneys had from December 1st until April 3rd to comply with these new rules. The people who didn't comply with reporting requirement were then fined $75 for a non-compliance fee and told they needed to comply by June 30th. The attorneys who were suspended were the ones who hadn't complied by June 30th and still hadn't turned in anything by July, when the bar began moving people to inactive status. Just so you know, technically speaking, if you are listed as inactive, you are not an attorney allowed to practice law right now. Theoretically, if you have any ongoing cases, you've got to notify your client and go, I'm not an attorney right now. Now, a lot of attorneys don't do that, but they're supposed to, because if that client calls you and asks you a question, technically you can't answer it by giving legal advice because you're not licensed to practice law. You are inactive. The attorney from the state bar acknowledged that the program was set up in part as a direct response to the allegations against former attorney Tom Girardi, who's now 84 years old, who was indicted earlier this year in Los Angeles and Chicago on fraud charges for allegedly stealing more than $18 million from clients. And boy, now it becomes really, really funny to go back and watch the clips off of Housewives where he's showering his child bride with all kinds of crazy and expensive gifts. And we thought that was such a perfect match. You know, it was like once in a while, God or whatever higher power is in charge of this finds two people and sees to it that they find each other because they're soulmates. And it hurts. It hurts. So he said, and I'm talking about the guy from the state bar, we knew we had to do a better job of educating attorneys about what their responsibilities are with client trust accounts, so we started to do this. It's a combination of Girardi and the fact that this is something that is just necessary. Here's the funny part. I know attorneys in California, and I've mentioned them, I've talked to them about this story, Tom Girardi. And they go, Steve, you wouldn't believe this. What his reputation was before it fell apart. Because he was known as the guy who would take on anybody, file the biggest lawsuits against the biggest corporations, and he'd get them to pay. And so if somebody had a huge case, if you brought it to Girardi and he took it, there was a chance it was going to be a huge case that paid big. He had that reputation. Now you can simply say, well, yeah, we've got the rules because of Girardi, and people know what you're talking about. So when your name goes from being a hero to being shorthand for just a bad guy, that's not good. The state Supreme Court in California stripped Girardi of his law license last year. The state bar acknowledged mishandling decades of allegations against him, saying in a statement that the indictments serve as further evidence of the seriousness of the abuse and malfeasance that ultimately led to his disbarment. Yeah, and the state bar should have taken action a lot earlier, and they didn't. Girardi got a national profile after his now defunct firm of Girardi and Keese won a case against Pacific Gas and Electric, in which the company agreed to pay $333 million to residents of Hinckley who blamed cancer and other diseases on contaminated water leaking from a gas pumping station. And the case, of course, was featured in the movie Erin Brockovich, starring Julia Roberts. And by the way, I've also seen footage of Tom Girardi where he just casually mentions his involvement with that film and about how he spent time on the set and how he and Julia Roberts are like this and, you know, all that stuff, you know, because he's a player. He's a Hollywood shooter, as they say. A government expert concluded last month that Girardi is mentally fit to stand trial, despite being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He faces the possibility of a decades-long prison sentence if convicted. The Times extensively reported on how Girardi escaped discipline by the State Bar of California, even after decades of accusations that he stole and misappropriated his clients' money. He was a big spender, and he was generous with people, not just those who were willing to marry him, but with those he was in front of as an attorney. So there were stories about him going places and taking judges on like junkets where they'd go on vacation. Like judges would go on vacation with him. And people with the state bar likewise. And so he just took care of the right people along the way. So when people filed complaints about him, they'd kind of like, hey, Tom, we got another one here. Can you just cool it a little bit? You're good? Okay, you're good. Hey, when are you going to the Isle of Greece? I've been to Nice. So that's what's happening there. There's 1,600 attorneys in California who currently are suspended for failing to do the paperwork regarding their trust accounts. And so, trust me, it's not going to cause a lawyer shortage in California. They've got more than enough lawyers to begin with. But there are 1,600 attorneys who need to get their acts together, or they might become permanently not attorneys. And it does make you wonder when somebody says, we need you to do this accounting and make sure you're doing everything on the up and up. When somebody just says, I haven't got around to it yet. Well, I understand it's a pain. It is a pain, okay? But you got to do it. And now Michigan does not have anything quite that severe. But I can tell you one thing, that if you bounce a check in your trust account for any reason, and I've spoken to a lot of attorneys about this, if you bounce a check from your trust account, the bank reports you to the state bar and says, just to let you know, this attorney just bounced a check out of a trust account. The state bar will come down on you like a ton of bricks. Because if you put money in the account and they cut a check to somebody else, that check should be good. So if it bounced, that means that the amount of money in the account dropped below what you owe your client, except it's not that you owe your client money, it's that it was their money in the first place. So if you put their money in the account and then cut them a check for their money and the check bounces, what happened to their money? That's the problem here. So they will come down on you and they'll say, okay, explain this. Now, I can tell you that I've spoken to attorneys that said, Steve, I put a check into my account, the trust account. I asked my bank, when will that check clear? And they'll say, it'll clear by Thursday. Attorney calls the bank on Friday. Did that check clear? Yes. They then hand their client a check out of the trust account. Client runs to the bank, tries to cash it. It doesn't clear. And he calls his bank, goes, you guys told me the money is clear. Oh, we thought it was. It's going to be held for one more day. Despite the fact the money was there, the check bounced. State bar got notified. State bar comes down on the attorney and goes, why did that check bounce? And you can explain the whole thing, but they'll investigate it. They're going to call the bank. They're going to call your client. They're going to look at your books. They're going to ask to see all the checks you've written to make sure. So it's a very serious issue. And I've encountered attorneys who've had problems with this here in Michigan. So it's a problem. But the fact that it got this out of control in California, which is a very, very populous state with a lot of attorneys, is an indication that they had been lax for quite some time. And it took Tom Girardi's mess to wake them up. So California bar suspends 1,600 attorneys for violating rules set up after Tom Girardi allegedly stole millions of dollars from his clients. And I can't wait till his trial begins. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. On the other hand, you have different fingers.